there's always these people, I think, again, especially when they're starting out reading. A friend of mine said it to me yesterday. He's like, why do I always get this card? Like you see cards recurring over and over again in your readings. And there's definitely a time where you're like, WTF, does, what's happening? And that's where using these other tools can come in handy. So if you know that, pick the Lover's card, for example, that the Lover's card is associated with rose quartz, take a piece of rose quartz, put that in your pocket during the day, see how that changes your outlook, see how that changes your day, see how it feels. Or similarly, put it under your bed while you're sleeping, see how that changes your dreams, things like that. And the same thing could be done with the oils that are attached to the Lover's card, or the herbs, or anything like that. Like incorporate that into your day, both day and night, and see how that changes your understanding of the card and your perspective and really your manifestation ultimately, right? Because that's what we're attempting to do.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead. In today's episode, I am delighted to welcome back to the show the wonderful Lilith Dorsey. Lilith is a respected author, filmmaker, and priestess, and their latest book, Tarot Every Which Way, is a beautifully crafted guide exploring connections between the cards and astrology, herbs, crystals, and food, and much more. I always enjoy conversations with Lilith and Lilith's perspectives on the cards, and so this recent book was a lovely jumping off point for our talk. Before we dive into that, outside of this podcast, I'm happy to announce that my co-high priestess of North Wildwood Coven, Denise Crucy, and I are launching the Wildwood Circle, a new membership community which is designed to inspire and support magical practitioners on their journeys, and we'll be sharing more details about that, so stay tuned. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving us a 5-star review, and sharing it with fellow seekers who might enjoy the conversations. You can also follow me on Instagram at Coffee and Divination if you'd like to give me your thoughts and share any potential guests or ideas you have for the show. I'm always happy to talk. With that, enjoy the show. So it's my pleasure to have back on the show Lilith Dorsey, who is a returning guest that I'm sure many of you are very happy to see again. And Lilith is here to talk about the latest book, Tarot Every Which Way, which is something that I was very excited when I heard about this project and knew that this book was going to come out. And though it has taken us a couple of months since publication to get this interview scheduled, it is an exciting thing to talk about. And I am so very glad that you could be back on the show to talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love this show and I think you're wonderful. We've been friends for a very long time. So it's always nice when we get to catch up and also talk about, our work and witchiness.
Yes, there's always a lot more. So you have been on the show before, which means you've already done the traditional first question, which is, your background of when you first started to work with divination and how that came into your life. And that was a very interesting discussion before. So I wanted to center the first question around why this book? What was your inspiration for writing this particular book? And why did you feel like you needed to do a book on tarot specifically?
I think there were two things. One was when I was in grad school, which at this point is 20 years ago, but I was taking a course on Antonin Artaud and the theater of cruelty, and how his sort of philosophy going behind things is the power of shock value. And that sort of goes into Jodorowsky's work about the sort of shock value of magic, shock value of spirituality, doing things differently to get you out of your comfort zone in order to bring about a different way of seeing things and a different universe and a different reality, And I was blessed enough to meet Jodorowsky a few years back and things like that. He's done a lot of work with tarot. For those of you who don't know, he is the director of probably the most famous tarot movie out there, Holy Mountain. So everybody loves Holy Mountain, and it's very shocking. I'll warn you if you haven't seen it, but it's one of my favorite films. So I just sort of wanted to think about, when I was in grad school, I came up with my own deck based on all of these works, and sort of how, yeah, we think about things very traditionally. We think about, a high priestess in her robes and being very spiritual, but we also think of other people as high priestesses, people that are sort of iconic feminine figures to us as high priestesses, and we think about things that are certainly non-traditional. So that was the beginning of it way back then. And also shortly after that, I had a client whose son was special needs, and she was trying everything. He was acting out, he was getting violent with her, she didn't know what to do, she was literally like at a loss for everything. And the reading was just a lot of different ways where she could calm him down, but she wasn't really processing exactly what I was saying in the cards. So that was sort of the beginning of my coming up with the correspondences that you find in the book. So if this card is, something that would be, I'm trying to think of what the cards were, but something that would be very calming, or something that this is associated with this card. These are the foods, these are the herbs, these are the scents. This is, I know you're a musician. These are the musical notes that go with each of it. And that she could translate to her son, even though he was nonverbal. And it helped to calm him down. It helped him sleep better. It helped their interactions improve. And I thought, well, this is probably something everybody can use, because when you're using a card, people don't necessarily understand what the Chariot means or what the Hierophant means, but they understand what it means when they eat this food, or they understand what it means when they hear this sound or smell this smell. And they can internalize that and then use it in their own divination practices and also in their magic.
Yeah, I think that that beautifully comes across in the book. And I think it's interesting to me because there's I think within the occult community, there can be a tendency to have lots of lists of correspondences, but without an understanding of what those mean. And the fact that, and you mentioned that story in the book, of course, and that's a really important point of seeing how this is not just, well, I did it because the book said so. And the book said that mint is important for some reason to this card. But when you really pair all of these things together in a way that then it's encouraging people to really experience them, then it becomes experiential as opposed to the list, because it actually has, as you're using in that story, of course, very real world impacts for a situation that's very necessary for someone. And that's not just something that it is necessary to know, but you have to apply it then in order to get the experience out of it. So yeah, and you do have, what's interesting in the book is that you give a number of different options, is kind of the best way I would know how to describe it, of how to interact with these cards. And you include meditations for them. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, you have an art background, so I'm assuming that something about like the visuality and the experientiality, how would I use that word? Christ, my goodness, my English skills.
Experiential nature. I don't know.
Experiential nature. Thank you. Of meditation, kind of, and how that interacts for you with the cards.
Yeah, I mean, I did go to film school. Not that I use that degree at all. I'm going to ask NYU for my money back, and I'm not going to get it. But I think that there's a way in which people visualize things, and through meditation, that's a really good gateway to magic that a lot of people utilize in order to have a better understanding of things, So I'm not just in the book, I'm telling you this is what this card means. I'm asking people, if they like to choose to do a meditation, open that door and walk into the card. What do you see? If we talk about things like the Fool's card, right? There's a dog there. What kind of dog is it? Is it a friendly dog? Is it a Chihuahua that's trying to bite you in the naughty bits? What kind of thing are you seeing on the beginning of your journey? And how is that coloring how you're going to go through your life, and how you're going to sort of adjust your magic to go in line with that. So that's why I did that. It's funny. I have a lot of people too that I interviewed for the deck, just based on the series of interviews that I'd done on my blog, Voodoo Universe, for the past, I don't know, geez, like 13, 14 years now I've had that blog. But I just asked all the famous tarot readers that I knew, what was important. And a lot of them, Dorothy Morrison, Matt Warren, they came back to me and they said, this is really important. Having that meditation where you interact with that card directly in your own mind, something that's guided by the imagery in the card, either your unique deck or the Rider-Waite-Smith or the Thoth deck, but that will help you understand them better. And it'll help you remember too, right? Like so many people pick up the jokes about the little white book because they don't know what it means. But if you go through that meditation and you remember you saw a chihuahua and it was very friendly and it went on your journey with you and it was licking at your ankles and happy, you'll remember that more than you would just, oh, this is what the word in the little white book said.
Yeah. Yeah. That takes time, though. And I think that is, you stress a number of times in the book, the importance of patience with this, which doesn't mean that you can't get, sometimes you just need an answer that is quick and you need to be able to get to something now. It's not saying you have to wait 20 years to be able to do this, but at the same time, it's kind of also seeing it as an unfolding journey, which I really love the use of meditation to get to that fluency, which is beautiful. It's also true, you bring up a number of different decks and examples from various decks. Hodorowski has already been mentioned, and some other people who are involved with other decks. You were the High Priestess for a particular project as well. So I was going to bring up the High Priestess card in other contexts in this interview anyway. But you chose to highlight a few different decks and ones that you feel are important for readers to know about. And I thought it'd be interesting for listeners to know kind of like some of those decks that you put into the book that you mentioned and why you call them out, as interesting for people to know about.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. Even the cover, we went back and forth, I think, with 10 different decks and cards, and I was fighting with them. I think people think that authors automatically pick the cover. That's not true. Certainly not with a major publisher, So, and after about 11 different versions, they were like, it's gonna be this one, So, but I wanted it, the cover cards, the Three of Cups from the Tower of the Vampires by Charles Harrington. And I really wanted, well, first of all, a friend of mine who's a Babalawo, a Santo priest, said to me, it's going to be the Three of Cups. And I was just like, oh, where's that coming from? But I wanted an image that was multicultural. There's three different races, ethnicities represented in that card. It's the Brides of Dracula, which I always love anyway. So that's really great that I got to use that card. So I was happy about it finally. But the inside ones, I wanted to include both the Rider-Waite-Smith, because I think that's a classic that a lot of people deal with. And then I also included the Millennium Thoth Tarot, because again, I think that's the second most popular deck out there that people are familiar with, the Thoth Tarot in all its various incarnations, and when I started, my mother, she still has it. She won't give it to me yet. A first edition Thoth Tarot book with all the plates and the paper and all of that and whatnot. And so I remember being little. That was probably my first exposure. I remember being little and looking at these images that are just so powerful and so sacred and so divine. So I wanted to include that in there in some way. And then the other ones, I wanted to be multicultural. There's the Santa Muerte Tarot, which I thought was important, not that only because she's becoming more and more, the Bony Lady's more and more popular every day now. People really just are embracing that kind of energy. So I wanted to include that. There were a few that they wouldn't let me do. They wouldn't let me put in the new David Bowie one. We couldn't get the rights to that. So I was sad. I was like, oh, I want that in there, So that was upsetting. But I wanted to have a full range. I used the Mermaid Tarot, which I think is beautiful. There's a lot of, again, multicultural images in there. People love mermaids. I have a water magic book, even though I don't think of myself as 100% water witch. I certainly, swim in those areas and understand that kind of association. So I wanted it to be something that, and it was also non-traditional as well. I wanted to include decks that were, okay, this card is a non-binary person. This card is somebody that's, non-traditional in whatever way, and using those images to sort of change things up, because I think we've moved beyond some of those early images, and this is what it has to be. You know, the lover's card doesn't necessarily have to be a man and a woman holding hands. You know, it could be a bunch of different things. And that was important to me to include that as well, to sort of open up what is possible in that space, because that's what's possible in our real life, and that's what we see in our real life. So why shouldn't we see it in the cards?
Yeah, and the imagery of tarot is hundreds of years old and has changed a great deal. And there's so much variety in the history of it already that it makes total sense that it shouldn't get just locked in place from one vision of it. Since the
Yeah,
world has changed over
definitely.
the last 400 years, so the cards can change too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it does make it more accessible for people. You know, I see somebody like me in those cards. One of the contributors was Courtney Alexander with the Dust to Onyx Tarot. And that was the first, you know, fat, black, queer, you know, non-traditional kind of things in that tarot deck. And I just love that deck because of that. And I think it allowed so many more people to sort of identify with non-traditional images in the tarot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I though you don't, you can find a deck that just works with you and you don't need to necessarily expand to have, 25 decks if you don't want to, but it is nice to have that variety when you're first looking into things and be able to then choose from a wider, field, shall we say, that then can speak to you. So that was very lovely. You mentioned it just now, your book on water magic and water witching of various sorts is fascinating, and I really enjoyed that book. You mentioned in this book you spend a little bit of time at the beginning and at the end referencing sort of classifications. That's not quite the word that I mean, but types of witches. So like crystal witches or water witches, or fire or air elemental witches. Can you maybe break down for us what you mean by that and why you think that those kind of categories are helpful for people?
I think, you know, I just did an event where it was the 20th anniversary, and the organizers came back and they were really just going like, these kids today, they don't, you know, and I was just I was like, you've been gone for 20 years, you have no idea. But I feel like especially the younger generations of witches, they really identify their witchcraft that way. You know, I think that they like to be hashtag water witch or whatever it is. And that's how they sort of see their entry into the craft. And I think it's beautiful because then you're playing to your strengths, you know? So when I went back and, you know, this book is Tarot Every Witch Way, WITCH, I wanted to sort of identify those different kinds of witches for people so they could again figure out how they approach magic. It's similar obviously to how they approach life. You know, or do you feel more comfortable by the ocean? Do you love mermaids? You know, all of those kinds of things. Well, then getting into the magic of water and dealing with the cards in their watery aspects and knowing what they are is going to help you more when you're trying to learn the cards. But it was hard because again, you know, I think that those of us who've been around a while, 25, 30 years ago, we were just happy to find other witches most of the time. We didn't have to be like, oh, well, I'm a divination witch or I'm a, you know, crystal witch. We would just were like, we're all witches and it's great. And it was. But now there's more of us and we're more specialized and we all, you know, have things that really speak to us literally, you know. So I think that that's helpful for people, but tracking down some of them was hard. You know, my friend Andre Vitamis wrote a book about chaos witch, but I'm still not sure 100%. I know what a chaos witch is. I know what it's not, but
I feel like not knowing what a chaos witch is part of being a chaos witch. I feel like if you can
it
define
is.
it, then
It
it's
is.
probably not it, you know? So
Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's whatever. You know,
yeah.
that's where we're at. Yeah, in a good way. Now, nothing
Oh yeah,
against
no,
chaos
no, of course.
witches,
I
but
have
you
friends
know,
that are chaos magicians, so yes, it's slightly different, obviously, than I think someone would define themselves as chaos witch, but then who knows with that title especially.
well, yeah, there's a lot of these terms I think that again, semantic drift that don't mean what they used to mean. So
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
unpacking all of that is really helpful. And I did find when I was coming up with my definitions and things, there's certainly a lot of pop culture, a lot of major magazines, major websites and stuff that do like to do this little quizzes about what kind of witch am I, you know. So I thought this would appeal to people.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you say, it's also that if it helps people play to their strengths, then I absolutely can see how that can help, especially if you're well, I don't want to pigeonhole it to just if you're starting out, because that's not fair, actually. But it can particularly be easier if you are starting out in something to be able to say, like, okay, this is overwhelming if I try to learn everything, or if I try to say, I am good at everything. But if I can find the things that are easiest for me, I can start from there and then expand out. And there's no reason not to value the things that you naturally gravitate to. That's wonderful. And I think that
Sure.
categories do help that. And that seems to be kind of how you were intending to use it in the book then, because then you have suggestions for people based on that categorization or affinity that then they can help use the card. So could you maybe give us an example of how you would see? I keep going back to Crystal Witch. I don't know why. You have many, many more than that. But, someone that identifies with that, how they could better interact with tarot through that.
Yeah, I mean, for crystal witches, since you brought up that example, I have things about like setting up crystal grids when you're doing your reading, put it on your working tarot altar, put it on your magical shrine, whatever, and then do the spread within that crystal grid. And different shapes, different crystals are obviously going to produce different results. But I think that's a really easy way that people can incorporate crystals into their tarot practice. Another good thing, again, to keep using crystals or anything really, there's always these people, I think, again, especially when they're starting out reading. A friend of mine said it to me yesterday. He's like, why do I always get this card? Like you see cards recurring over and over again in your readings. And there's definitely a time where you're like, WTF does, what's happening? And that's where using these other tools can come in handy. So if you know that, pick the Lover's card, for example, that the Lover's card is associated with rose quartz, take a piece of rose quartz, put that in your pocket during the day, see how that changes your outlook, see how that changes your day, see how it feels. Or similarly, put it under your bed while you're sleeping, see how that changes your dreams, things like that. And the same thing could be done with the oils that are attached to the Lover's card, or the herbs, or anything like that. Like incorporate that into your day, both day and night, and see how that changes your understanding of the card and your perspective and really your manifestation ultimately, right? Because that's what we're attempting to do.
Yeah, and I think that plays in a couple of different ways. I've had a couple of guests on who have talked about how if they draw a card that they don't particularly like, I will use the Tower as an example because I really don't love that card. It's one of there's no bad cards, and I agree with that. But then I also don't really like if I see the tower in my tarot reading, it's just no, I'm not gonna lie. But that there are ways that then you can encourage that energy to express in your life in a way that is less damaging, that is
Okay.
less destructive, or to try to say, like, oh, I see that this is coming. I will try to interact with this in a way that maybe doesn't manage it, but gives it a healthier way to express through your life. Do you know what I mean? And I'm wondering if when you include it, because I wanted, one of my next questions was about, like, you have recipes and, practical examples of interacting with each of these cards, particularly the major arcana in the book. How do you think about that? Like, could you, in that type of example, think of making something that had to do with a card that maybe isn't your favorite as a way to better manage it in your life? Or how do you think about that interaction?
Yeah, definitely that could work, and that was one of the cards where I was like, you may not want to do this meditation, like you may not want to walk into the tower, you may not be ready for that, and that's okay too, but I think that trying to think what the recipe is. I
Oh
know
yeah, I
there's
don't
death and
remember.
jello
I can't.
shots. So there's death and like black cherry jello shots. Oh, I know. Yeah. There's all of these things. But if you are going through it and you use the scent, that might help you understand it better, and I think the thing, especially with the tower, or I don't like a lot of the swords cards. I don't get happy when I see them, let's put it that way, so if you're going through that, there's a way in which, don't panic, right? Like the Hitchhiker's Guide, don't panic, have your towel. But there was one time I got the tower and I was like, oh no. And I usually read with the New Orleans voodoo deck, for a variety of different reasons. I practice New Orleans voodoo, and I can honestly say, good friends with Louis Martinet and Sally Ann Glassman, the creators. And so I think that, having a deck where I know the people who made it, the imagery works for me. I've been using it forever, that kind of thing. But in that deck, the card is the delusion. It's like, they actually did the deck before Katrina, but it was like the levee flooding. So that was the card. So I was freaking out one time, and I got the card and I was like, oh no, what's going to happen? I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't want any bad things to happen. And literally my water heater broke and there was water all over the floor. So that was the tower, right? Like it was, I don't know, back at the time, probably way more money than I could afford to spend, but it wasn't, nobody had a horrible, nobody ended up in the hospital, things like that. It was literally just a delusion, and it was water and it went away and we cleaned it up, So I think that the recipes or the scents or the herbs or the practices can help you get through whatever those stressful or difficult situations are and handle it and manage it better. Another thing I love to do when I get one of those cards is pick a card that I do want to see in my life and manifest, and put that on top of the other card and leave that out. And then maybe put a crystal around it, maybe put some herbs or a candle or something to sort of mitigate the intensity of what that card is going to manifest for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is kind of, that's the other side of that coin of, there's the example of the things that are a little bit more tricky or difficult to deal with, like swords or, some of those harder cards, shall we say. But then there is also how you bring in the energy of the cards that are very much in line with what you want to come into fruition. So you have those recipes. Is this something that you later in the book, you mentioned the idea of creating shrines and altars that involve these cards? That would be another example kind of how you can interact with them in a way that is outside of reading, but is still bringing in their energy. Do you encourage people to do these more with sets of cards, with like entire spreads, or are you thinking of these shrines more as singular energies that you're like, this is the spirit of this card that I call to, this shrine particular for my life?
You could do it either way. I mean, I do recommend everybody, when they're doing readings, especially when they start out, to have some kind of tarot altar meaning a temporary space that you're setting up. So that just way it's sacred, right? You're not doing it on the kitchen table where you eat, or maybe other stuff happens or whatever. So you're making, it's like a little mini ritual that you're doing in setting it up. You're making sure all the elements are present. You're making sure whatever you need is present. And that's just part of, both physically and spiritually, I think a good idea to set that up. But for the shrines, for the other ones, that could be whatever you want. You could use a series of cards. You could use just one card. If you were having difficulty and you were having recurring cards and you didn't understand, setting up a shrine or an altar with those kinds of items would be helpful, because then it's like that energy is then present in your life, right? If the card is coming back over and over again, then that energy really is present in your life. So if you set up, even if it's just temporary, some kind of space in your life where that is, when you walk by it, you'll think about it. When you smell those scents, when you're, even in the other room, you'll think about it. And that will help you get a better understanding, because it's always present. So you're incorporating it purposefully into your life in order to better understand it and help it manifest the way it needs to.
Yeah, and it's a longer term kind of welcoming in of that. So it doesn't just be, well, I pulled it, I saw it. That's going to subconsciously, and consciously influence you. But then if you have that space for it to be more present tangibly and physically with you for a longer period, more benefit, more connection, all of those things.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. There are a couple of things related to the ways that you incorporate recipes in the book. So you give recipes that are, sort of recipes for incenses or, other magical components, and also things that are, foods. When people are first starting out, do you conceive of what is best for people to be just reading for themselves and kind of getting overviews, or do you sometimes with people ask them to go like card by card through the major arcana? Like, how do you envision a good starting point of going through these cards? You know what I mean? Is it the kind of like start from the Fool and work your way through, or see who keeps showing up for you and go there?
I think it depends on what kind of person you are. I had a really good friend of mine, she's no longer with us, Morgana Davies, and she had told me, Magic 101 is if you're somebody who's very regimented and you always get up at the same time and eat the same thing for breakfast and go the same way to work and come home the same way, then your magic is about changing that up, go a different way, wake up 5 minutes earlier, 5 minutes later, like changing your routine because you're so dependent on the routine. And I said to her, I was like, what if you're the person that doesn't have a routine? Because that's always been me. And she was like, well, then you got to do the routine. So if you're somebody who learns best by going, I need to go through this front and back, I need to read it, I need to do all the exercises, then no, I say do the opposite. Do the opposite. Just do bibliomancy. Open it up, stick your finger in, do whatever it says on that page, and do that every day for a month or something like that, because that's going to be the universe guiding you, or vice versa. If you're somebody who doesn't ever read it cover to cover, then yes, your magic is going to be about having that discipline, because there's times in, we've both been doing this a long time. There's times in magic where you're going to need both. You're going to need the discipline, but you're also going to need to be able to turn on a dime and pivot and just go with whatever's happening, because that's just the nature of the beastie. So it has to have both of those things. And you need to be really comfortable with both of those things.
Which ties back into what you were saying at the very beginning of the interview of like, kind of tarot and the unexpected. That is also kind of the arts of divination and the art of change and their linkages, because if you're only going to tarot in the way that you always go about things, then probably things will stay the same and it's not going to be as transformative as it could be. So really not being afraid to go the direction that is very different for you will give you more benefits in the long run. I think that's a very important recommendation, especially with something like divination, where if you're going to change your fate, you're going to have to do something different, which means you're going to have to get comfortable with that difference.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think this is one of those lessons about divination that I think is also about life, like if you are not having good self-care, eventually you're going to get sick, and life is going to make you have good self-care. There's going to be meds you have to take and visits you have to go to and all of that, So that's just the nature of things, like having, as my godmother used to say, when you have a body, this is what happens when you have a body. There's always going to be the unexpected. There's always going to be those times of change. There's going to be that wheel of fortune. There's going to be bad times. There's going to be good times. And you're going to have to learn how to process it and go through with it. And then it's going to start all over again.
Yes, absolutely. Lessons continue for as long as we're here. And I'm sure after too,
but afterwards too. They're like, it ain't easy over here on this side.
Oh no, it's more to do. Yeah. So, I always love, I know we talked about this the last time you were on the show, but I feel like there's just always more to say on this. The act of thinking about our questions, because that's kind of ties into what we were just talking about like knowing yourself well enough to know how you need to go about working with tarot is also probably related to how you think about the questions you ask. I have some specific questions, but I was just wondering, do you have any thoughts on, after now coming to the end, this is last time we talked, you hadn't written this book. Is there anything more that's occurred to you about the art of like helping people find good questions that's come out of going through this process of writing the book?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the advice people always gave me is, don't get hung up on specific outcomes, and I think that's the other step before that has to be, and be careful what you're asking. You know what I mean? Like, don't be, oh, does this person love me? Right? Everybody's 12-year-old question, 13-year-old question when they're a teenager. Oh, I want this person to love me.
I don't know. Somewhere inside us, we're all still 12 and 13 anyway, but yes.
Right. Right. But I, even when I have clients, I encourage them to say, am I going to find the right love for me? And that could look very different. As some of the people, I won't call them out by name in the book, ended up being very happy in their life, being married to a same-sex person where they had, and I remember doing love readings for them and being like, you're going to find your person, but you're not looking in the right place, So what's important is not necessarily, oh, is it this one outcome? Because you don't know, there may be a better outcome there for you. It could be your person, and that's great. You've already found your person. But if there's somebody that's better for you out there, or and that just doesn't relate to people, it relates to any situation, anybody who's bought a house. Like I think I put in offers on 4 or 5 houses before I bought my house, and I cried every time I didn't get it. That was the one. Oh my God. And people would laugh at me. They're like, no, it's not the one, because you don't have it. That's by definition not the one. You will have the one, and it will be everything you need. So there's this kind of willing suspension of belief, not disbelief, but belief in this moment that you have to have this particular outcome. So when I do readings, it's like, oh, I can ask specifically what that is going to happen, but I don't get tied. Oh, maybe I'm not going to get this gig, or I'm not going to get this person, or I'm not going to get this opportunity. But that doesn't mean there's not a better one out there for me. And how should I act through this process in order to bring the best thing for me to me? And that's what I ask people to think about and sort of be mindful about when they shape their questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that taking a moment to step back from what you think is your question and see if there's a question underneath it. I agree, is very, very important for all of us, no matter how long we've been doing it. So
no, it's true. And like I said, it works with everything. It works with health. How am I going to get the best healthcare for me? How am I going to get the best whatever, and getting out of your own way is part of that sometimes.
Absolutely. You have an interesting, I'm always curious, because I have helped people that end up coming to tarot a lot of times with yes or no questions and have trouble reframing them as non-yes or no questions. And there's great ways to do that. I also like having optionality with, various card decks to be able, if you need to do a yes, no. I'm always fascinated what people's ways are of getting to yes, no. And you include one sort of like idea for yes, no. Can you explain that? Because I liked that example in the book.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think everybody needs a good yes, no. But honestly, since this is a divination talk, I'll say that normally I'll just grab my pendulum. That's what happens.
Yeah,
Or my dowsing rods.
exactly. Just use the tool that's better for it. It's just easier.
I mean, that's easy. And they work really well for me, although I have seen people that they don't work for, So if you do need to turn to the cards, one of the ones I always went to is just sort of a aces spread where you're shuffling, cutting, mixing them up however you want to. And then you turn up 13. If you get to an ace, you stop, and then you start a new pile into 3 piles. So it's 3 piles of, if you don't get an ace, then you just, after the 13, you start the second pile. Same deal there. If you don't get an ace in those ones, which would you usually almost always get it. And then it's the same way you would do divination with coins or anything else. If you get 2 upright and 1 reversed, that's a maybe yes. If you get 3 upright, that's a yes. If you get 3 reversed, that's a no. If you get 2 reversed, that's a maybe no. So that's just, and people do the same thing with coins. I've seen people read with coins and stuff like that way. So that's just a standard. So that's why I put it in the book, but I do think everybody needs a good yes, no. I think that's the thing people need to master at the very beginning. You were asking me where I think people should start. And I think having a good yes, no is a place to start, because it's easily verifiable, right? Like, so you can say, is it going to rain on me today? Literally, let's be figurative about it, right? Like, am I going to get rained on today? So that's something that I know if I got rained on, I know if I didn't get rained on. Paul, do your yes, no in the morning. If it comes in line with what actually happened, you're getting better and better with these readings, and then you can move forward.
But you have to track that then, which is the thing I
You
take
do.
of having to pay attention to. Did this actually work or not? But
Yeah,
that is
you
a very good
do.
simple example of how you can easily do that and look at your batting average and improve that batting average over time. Hopefully.
Yeah. I miss him. I had a really good friend who was very Capricorn, and he would write down everything. Like, there were all these like digital records in his phone and his computer, and he would know that this happened to his friend on this day 15 years ago, and I could just call him up and be like, hey, what happened to me 15, and he's no longer with us. So I've got to call him a different way. So that's where we're at. But I miss it. I miss that kind of Capricorn, like record earth sign. My daughter's a Virgo, earth sign record keeping moment that I do not have as a fire and air signs, Yeah.
That's amazing. That is a level of record keeping I have not achieved, that we could all strive for, but probably not achieve.
No, no. Yeah. I mean, it's nice to know it's out there, you know?
Oh, absolutely. You also talk a little bit about reversals, and I was curious with what we've been talking about. What is your general perspective, especially for maybe people who are new, about how you encourage people to think about reversals? Because I've spoken to people that they'll get very confused, which there's a case to be made that reversals can be confusing because you'll hear so many interpretations of, well, it's just delayed, or it's lesser, or it's exact reverse of what the card usually means. And I think all of those viewpoints can be true at different times in different readings. But how would you want to try to explain reversals to people if you had to?
I mean, I think if you're used to reading reversals, if you want to read reversals, go right ahead and do that. I mean, for me, there's enough meanings in each card to get a handle of. And I sort of always read ill-dignified cards, which are going back to the list of less pleasant cards that we had. So if I do a spread and, out of the 10 card spread, more than half of them are swords, tower, all these kinds of cards that are less pleasant, then you're going to have a hard time no matter what, and vice versa. If I do a reading and it's all major arcana cards, it's all cups, it's all these kinds of things that are more positive most of the time, then it's going to be a better thing. So I really read the cards more in relation to each other as to whether or not it's right side up or upside down. And that's just how I do it. But if you read them with reversals as any of those meanings that you mentioned, lesser, opposite, mitigated, nuanced, but I think honestly there really are enough meanings for the cards for it to tell you exactly what you need to without then giving each card another meaning.
Yeah, and generally when you just read what's on the card, you're probably going to get close to the truth if you're honest with yourself and also kind of looking carefully. You'll see it already without having to tie yourself in too many knots, probably.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that I like to ask for people is that I find that sometimes the things that, how do I put this? The things that don't work, or the things that I have, like the pitfalls that I've fallen into with any particular, art form or divination practice that I'm doing, are my most important learning experiences. Could you, if you feel comfortable, could you share like a time when you feel like, or something that you used to do with tarot, or sometime when it just didn't work, and like what you learned from something that maybe you don't do anymore, or something that was a pitfall you used to fall into, so you're more aware of it now and you sort of like to warn people about it, you know what I mean?
I know this is my true confession moment. I think that in the beginning, I used to just read so much. I would just read about every situation. I'd read about everything. Whereas now it's more of I'll do it on Sabbaths, or I'll do it on big feast days or holidays or something and record that and whatever. But in general, I just sort of try and live my life the best way possible and not attach it to the results that are happening. You know what I mean? Is my home protected? Do I have enough money to pay the bills? Things like that, rather than, oh my gosh, I have to get on this big TV show, or I have to, whatever, have this moment. And I do less of that now. So for me now, it's more of just a helping tool, or a tool just to sort of check in every once in a while, as opposed to something that I'm obsessively trying to find out the outcome of each thing.
Yeah. Finding that balance of not doing it enough or doing it way too much is, I think, always a very, very tricky thing, because I've gone through periods where I've done like either extreme of avoiding reading, because you're like, maybe I don't want to hear the answer. I'll just avoid reading on it because it's fine. I don't need any information because it's all fine. Or you can go the opposite and read on everything. So yeah, I think that reminder of balance is very important.
Yeah. And I think, there's Crowley talked about this a lot. There's certain cards where it's just like, no, stop reading, and I get that a lot sometimes with my clients that get very obsessive about a certain thing. They want to ask the same question over and over and over again. And I think that's insulting to the cards, like if you had a friend and you asked them the same thing over and over again, they'd tell you to shut up. So the cards don't want you to be asking them this. They've told you what the answer is, the solution, how you should act in the situation. And you've just, like you said, patience. You've just got to wait for it to play out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, that is excellent advice. Um, you have finished this wonderful book and it is now out in the world. What projects are you working on, and what can you tell us about, other things that you are doing so that, people can know how they can find you, or what else that you want to share?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot. They can check my website, lilithdorsey.com, but I'm doing a lot of in-person events. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh. I'm just doing so much. It's nuts. It's like I every time I turn around, it's like, what is happening? I have a community garden here in New Orleans that I've been working on, and it really is a labor of love. We're in a blighted area. There's no supermarket for probably a mile and a half. It's all lower income people of color, and so the fact that we can provide food and things like, and just a nice green space for people in this neighborhood is something that's really important for me. So that takes up a lot of my time. But like I said, it's a labor of love, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and you tie in herbalism and give the example. Actually, I wanted to bring that up. So thank you for reminding me of the tarot garden you mentioned, that is in Italy, and you're very encouraging of people to kind of create their own and think about, partnering with the green world with tarot, and to be able to create things of beauty like that. In the community garden, I'm not sure if you're able to do that, but it's a lovely thing to kind of also see those examples of the connections between the cards and what is the other life around us.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have a lot of plants that I mention in the book growing in the garden, hibiscus, bee balm, herbs, other things, like flowers, native plants, other things like that. And it's funny, when I told my publisher that I was going to put in a section about tarot gardens, she went, "Who's going to want that?" And
Oh, I love that section. That's lovely that you
I
mentioned that.
know,
Yeah.
I know. And then I judged the garden show here in New Orleans. So I went to the garden show the next day and told all my other judges and all the other officials at the garden show, nobody would want that. That's it. They were like, "We want it. We love plants. Oh my gosh, let me see." So
Yeah.
it just depends on who you are and what you're doing, and people can do it. They don't have to do it on a huge giant yard scale. They could just plant a couple of plants in a flower pot, even if they're in an apartment, put it on the windowsill, and see what grows really well, and just sort of get to know that plant and understand that plant. And I think we wouldn't be witches if we weren't connected to nature in some way, shape, or form. So this is a really simple way people can have a little bit of nature even in their own space.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that in this book, you are giving so many options for people to see how this is not just a thing that is a thing you do like once a quarter when you take the tarot cards out. It's like these things can be interacting with you all the time through a lot of different methods, in addition to just when you pull the cards out themselves. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
well, I thank you very, very much for your time, and I will include all the links to your website and stuff you're doing in the show notes. So for people that are listening, you can click through to any of those links. And Lilith, you need to tell me when you're going to be in New York, so I'll see if I happen to be in New York when you are there, because it'd be lovely to see. But yeah. Anyway, is there anything else that you want to share with people as a sort of like last thought, or thing that you want to share as inspiration for people with their tarot journey?
Yeah, just enjoy your cards. You know what I mean? I think so many people, media gives us all this kind of bad press. It's scary. You're going to learn something you don't want to know. Just have the mindset that you're going to have a positive interaction. And if there's something you couldn't handle or you don't want to know, leave that aside. Tell your cards, I don't want to know right now. I just want to know what's going to be most helpful and beneficial for me. And we're going to have a great time.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your time for this interview. And I hope we will talk again about another book and other projects again soon. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare guide me thorns in my